on Senate Bill 5496. I see Senator Lovick here, so we'll welcome him up. And staff, would you please brief the bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, for the record, Riley Benj, staff to the committee. Before you is Senate Bill 5496, creating the Covenant Homeownership Account and Program to address the history of housing discrimination due to racially restrictive real estate covenants in Washington State. To provide some background, county auditors collect fees as set by statute for recording documents. Restrictive real estate covenants were recorded across the state until 1968, when the Federal Housing Act prohibited real estate covenants that would discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, or national origin. In 1969, the Washington Law Against Discrimination, or WALAD, was created and prohibits discriminatory practices in real estate transactions and credit and insurance, among other things. The WALAD declares void any provision in a written instrument relating to real property that purports to forbid or restrict the conveyance, encumbrance, occupancy, or lease of property to individuals within a protected class. Pursuant to the Federal Equal Credit Opportunity Act, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau may authorize the extension of special purpose credit to applicants who meet eligibility requirements for a credit assistance program expressly authorized by state law for the benefit of an economically disadvantaged class of persons. The bill before you establishes the Covenant Homeownership Program. The program creates the following obligations for state and local entities. First, the Housing Finance Commission must complete a Covenant Homeownership Program study that recommends potential policy changes to reduce racial disparities in homeownership to remedy the impacts of past and ongoing discrimination against Black, Indigenous, and people of color and other historically marginalized communities. Second, Commerce, together with the Housing Finance Commission, must create special purpose credit programs to provide down payment and closing cost assistance to the economically disadvantaged class of persons identified in the Covenant Homeownership Program study. To be eligible to receive assistance, an applicant must have a household income at or below 100% of the area median income, be a first-time home buyer, and be or be a descendant of a Washington State resident who was a resident on or before April 11th, 1968, and was or would have been excluded from home ownership in Washington State by a racially restrictive real estate covenant. Finally, county auditors must collect a document recording assessment of $100 to fund the Covenant Homeownership Program. A fiscal note was requested but has not yet been received, and with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Riley. Do we have any questions for staff? I'm not seeing any, so welcome, Senator Lovick, and tell us about your bill.
Good evening, Madam Chair, and thank you. For the record, my name is John Lovick, and I'm a senator from the 44th District in Snohomish County. And Madam Chair, after listening to the excellent bill report by Mr. Benj, I would love to tell you that I came up with this idea organically. But inspiringly, it was a dear friend and colleague, Speaker Emeritus Frank Chop, who first brought this to my attention. We all know Representative Chop's enthusiasm for homeownership. He is a stalwart supporter of housing justice. When Representative Chop showed me the covenant restrictions that existed in Washington State, in a word, I was appalled. Appalled that such texts could still exist, appalled that these agreements are still pervasive by the thousands. This hatred is written in our state's DNA. I say surprisingly because after we spoke, Representative Chop and I met weekly with stakeholders from the community to galvanize this cause. So that's why I'm here today. Homeownership is the primary wealth builder for many Washingtonians. As a matter of fact, in the United States, it is the primary means by which people become self-sufficient. And yet, for generations, Black, brown, indigenous, and people of color have faced massive barriers to homeownership. Homeownership rates among people of color are nearly 20% lower than white Washingtonians. When you compare Black families with white families, that gap widens to nearly 40%. We have a massive wealth disparity in the state, and today we can do something about it. Senate Bill 5496 will help close this gap. I'm before you still appalled and ashamed of where we are. No one could read one of these restrictive covenants and not be ashamed. Madam Chair, since I spoke with Representative Chop 5 months ago, I have to confess, I live with deep shame in my heart. And when I say deep shame, the shame is because in 1973, 5 years after covenant restrictions ended in Washington State, I purchased my first house using a GI Bill. My down payment was $200, and the government actually sent me back $150 with an apology that they took $200 in the first place. So when I say that I'm ashamed, I know that a lot of people sacrificed so much for the privileges that I was afforded. Was it the GI Bill that allowed me to purchase my first home? No. 51 years ago, it was our state deciding to make things right. Our state decided to end the enforceability of these restrictions and to reckon with our past. But the shame that those before me endured still hurts my heart. I served in the military, but I think of the men and women who served Vietnam and years before me, the shame they had to endure. So I was no better than anyone else, no more deserving of the pursuit of happiness. No one is better than anyone else because of the color of your skin. Senate Bill 5496 allows us 51 years later to make that point clearer than ever. To take that work further, it gets us closer to a world where we are recognized by the content of our character and not by the color of our skin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Lovick, for bringing this very important bill forward. You know, it's important for us to be reminded of our history and how we got here. And I think that this is one of the most important bills of this session, to be quite honest. And I just want to thank you, and I see the House sponsor of the House bill is here as well. Representative Taylor, thank you for your work on it as well. And, you know, I look forward to seeing this bill on the Senate floor. So thank you very much. And do we have, go ahead.
I was just going to thank you.
Do we have any questions? Senator Fortunato.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Lovick, I'm sorry. You included descendants
Yes.
of people.
Yes.
As opposed to someone that may have actually experienced this discrimination. Can you explain how a descendant should be benefiting from, if I'm not the one that was discriminated against, my parents were, but I'm not, how should I be included?
So it's a good question. And, you know, when we met during the summer and we started meeting, I believe in September, I think just the conversation with the stakeholders, basically, we came up with this language. And I mean, your point could be well taken, but I think you'll probably have a broader conversation and maybe someone could answer the question with a little more knowledge of what we were thinking. I was at every one of the meetings, but this part I don't recall.
Thank you. If we can talk offline on that. Thank you.
Senator Frame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, you know, if I might, I was not in the conversations, but as somebody who spent a lot of energy in thinking about wealth and the transfer of wealth in this country, Mr. Ranking Member, I would say the concept of intergenerational wealth, sir, is that you build wealth and you hope to pass it on to your descendants. And when your parents and grandparents are denied the opportunity to build that wealth, you as their descendant are not left with anything. So I think it is a very clear connection, Mr. Ranking Member, of why descendants would be included in this bill. And that is my answer to that question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Do we have any other questions or comments, I guess? And I appreciate the discussion very much. You know, it is an important point to make that the way that you know, racism has been institutionalized in so many aspects in our country. And this is just one of them. And the effects are clear. And this is why I'm sure you're bringing the bill and Representative Taylor's bringing the bill. And we appreciate the conversation is very needed and very much appreciated. And like I said, I look forward to seeing this bill on the Senate floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And with that, we're going to hold this hearing open. And we're going to go into public testimony. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's start with the panel, Michael Brown, Patience Malaba, and Lachelle Lucas, who I believe are all in Zoom. And if we could have on deck also in Zoom, Carol, Paul, Ellen Dimbit, and Janet Christofferson, that would be great. And I believe Michael's on screen.
Go ahead, Michael. Welcome. You're on mute. We can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Much better. Yes, much better. Thank
Okay,
you.
there we go. There we go. Thank you. I'm here speaking in support of Senate Bill 5496. Things that you already know. Home ownership is the primary way most households build wealth in this country. And when I think about home ownership, I think about stability. I think about a sense of place and belonging. And I think about the building of equity and wealth. Yet we know that access to opportunity to own has not been evenly distributed. History's taught us that it's taken generations of systemic, racist, and discriminatory policies and practices to get us to where we are today. And what this committee has already talked about, you understand that those systemic and structural changes at all levels of government is the only way that we can kind of move forward. Housing stability has been hard to come by for Black households. They've been disproportionately represented among our residents who are paying too much rent and who are experiencing homelessness, which only perpetuates the need for urgent crisis relief. What's been coded into our laws, policies, and practices are barriers to credit and home ownership for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Home ownership rate for Black households fare even worse than other households of color. And it's a result of policies and practices that included redlining, racially restrictive covenants, mortgage subsidies, and incentives alongside of displacement and gentrification. Credit, including home mortgages, harder and more expensive to attain for folks of color. And as a result, there's little or no opportunity to grow intergenerational wealth that's essential for a down payment to buy a home. 42% of Black households in this state have zero net wealth. My name is Michael Brown. I am the civic architect for Civic Commons. And we have convened a network of cross-sector community partners working to increase Black home ownership through an effort called the Black Home Initiative. Many of our partners will speak today, but I wanted you to know that the primary purpose of the Black Home Initiative is to increase Black home ownership. But the ultimate impact we aspire to is a reduction of racial and economic inequity and an increase in intergenerational household wealth. Achieving that goal requires a number of things: increasing the supply of ownership homes available to purchase, supporting Black households who want to buy a home, helping them complete that process and obtain an appropriate mortgage, and overcoming the existing fragmented ecosystem of private, public, and nonprofit organizations. Senate Bill 5496 would create a covenant homeownership account to help close the racial gap in homeownership and address the longstanding impacts of the history of housing discrimination. Just one really quick story.
Michael, I'm sorry, we don't have time, but I want to thank you so much. We're actually going to put people on a timer now, 90 seconds. We have so many, and we're already going over our normal hearing time till 4 p.m. But I tell you what, send us your story in writing, and we'll make sure that gets to be part of the record. And thank you so much for testifying today. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to reiterate, we're going to go until 4 o'clock, and if we could set the timer for 90 seconds, starting with this next testifier, Patience Malaba.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony today. My name is Patience Malaba, and I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Development Consortium of King County. I am also a part of the Black Home Initiative that Michael Brown just spoke to. And today I am testifying in strong support of Senate Bill 5496. And I cannot thank enough the sponsor, Senator Lovick, and others who have worked with us during interim to bring community stakeholders together to really talk about what it means to solve for codified barriers that serve as roadblocks to homeownership. This is truly a once-in-a-generation monumental step toward addressing the home ownership rates gap in our state. And let me start by telling the story of the opportunity that is created by this bill. This bill would create a covenant homeownership account and a program to provide down payment and closing cost assistance to groups of people who will be identified through a covenant homeownership program study. Those participants will, of course, have to be first-time home buyers with income limitations, and they have to meet other criteria. This is groundbreaking in terms of a step in the right direction, leading the nation and demonstrating our commitment to change by setting the first in the country government-led special.
Patience, I'm sorry, the time is up. The timer goes really fast. But please send us the rest of your comments or your whole comments, please, and we'll put them in the record. Thank you. Madam Vice Chair.
Lachelle Lucas next, and just a reminder, if we can have Carol, Paul, Ellen Dimmet, and Janet Christopherson ready, that'd be great.
Yeah, and if you're in gallery mode, you will be able to see the timer, so please put yourself in gallery mode so you can see that. All right, very good. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
Lachelle. Team, is Lachelle Lucas available?
It looks like she's on mute.
I'm here. I was on mute. Sorry. Oh, thank you for letting me speak here today. I am a future Habitat homeowner, a public servant, and mother. I was born and raised in Seattle and lived in the Rainier Valley area for years. My parents shared the difficulties they experienced while trying to purchase a home in Seattle, and none of it involved their income. It was based upon their race. They were Black. Even when it was technically illegal, they mostly only found housing in red line areas of Seattle, which were deemed undesirable. Today, drive down Rainier Avenue or Martin Luther King, and there are brand new homes that have been built that I would never be able to afford to purchase because they're too expensive. Because of tools of discrimination like racially restrictive housing covenants, my grandparents were impacted. That made it difficult for my parents to acquire home ownership. When it came to my turn to purchase a home, they couldn't help me with the down payment. But recently, I found a pathway to home ownership through the Habitat of Seattle, King, and Kittitas County that will make my dream come true. We can do more. We can pass this bill and create paths to home ownership, housing stability, financial security, and pride for millions of Washingtonians like me. I ask that you please support SB 5496. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lachelle. All right, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My understanding is the three people we called on deck, Carol, Ellen, and Janet, are not in Zoom, so we'll go to our next panel in person. Clifford Cawthon, Carl Schrader, and Amanda Sandoval. Sorry, Amanda Sandoval is on Zoom. And then if Kathleen Robertson and Michael Babbitt, who are on Zoom, could be on deck and ready to go, that'd be great. But let's start out with Cliff.
Sorry. Oh, there we go. Brilliant. Thank you, Chair Kuderer, Vice Chair Frame, Ranking Member Fortunato. It's an honor to speak here today. My name is Cliff Cawthon, and I'm the Policy Manager for Habitat for Humanity, Seattle, King, and Kittitas County. I'm also here as a grandson of Carl and Edith Cawthon. And we're also a member of the Black Home Initiative. And I'm here specifically because we're in support of SB 5496, and we want to see the damage done by racially restrictive covenants repaired, a damage that was done and that Washington State had a hand in doing and creating opportunities for first-time home buyers. So throughout my life and my education, I've listened to stories from my elders, my grandparents I just referenced, people in my community about opportunities that were robbed from them for no other reason besides the fact that they were Black. And today we have a housing crisis, and therein we have a widening homeownership gap that may essentially transform housing into a state of de facto housing apartheid. And I know that seems pretty extreme, but that gap is extreme. And albeit my family's from New York, that as you've heard, that many of our homeowners and millions of other Black and brown folks here in Washington state have been impacted by racially restrictive covenants and robbed of opportunities for no other reason besides the color of their skin, their background, and other preconceived prejudices. This bill will allow us to address the harm done by those millions of Washingtonians by investing in down payment assistance in essential programs. So I'll just end by saying that we as Habitat support this bill. We know that homeownership is the most expedient way to build wealth, and we encourage all of you to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Carl?
Thank you, Chair Kuderer. I do know how to pronounce your name.
That's okay. I sometimes mess that up too.
And members of the committee. Carl Schrader with the Association of Washington Cities, here to support this bill. So I participated in the Homeownership Disparities Task Force that the Department of Commerce went through this interim, and we all learned a lot about the, eye-opening information and examples that you've been hearing about today and from the sponsor, and the need for specific and intentional actions to undo that history. So that's one reason we support this bill. The other reason is it dovetails very nicely with the work that you've asked cities to do under House Bill 1220 from a couple of years ago to examine our history of zoning and the racist past that it may have had in some areas, and to begin to take action to undo those impacts. So this is a way for us to actually meaningfully address those impacts. It also melds well with the desire from our members to have a real push around home ownership in our efforts around housing stability and investments this year. And I'll end on the stability note. We've had a lot of talk about rent control in this legislature, and you can think of the 30-year mortgage as rent control for the folks who are lucky enough and have the resources to get access to it. And you're not subject to the whims of the market, and your rents aren't increasing outside of your control, and you can plan your life and your situation much better. So commend this to you. Happy to work on it as you see any problems. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're going to hear from Amanda Sandoval next, but if we could have on deck, because Kathleen and Michael are not on Zoom, on deck to have Quintard Taylor, Sean Scott, and Sophia Dowling. But let's go first to Amanda Sandoval.
Hello, committee members. My name is Amanda Sandoval, and I'm a Senior Public Policy Impact Manager, United Way, King County, and I'm here in support of Senate Bill 5496. Today we have a chance to right a wrong that a system was designed to create racial restrictions coded into our laws, policies, and practices to keep BIPOC communities out of houses and neighborhoods. Today we have less Black home ownership than the Jim Crow era. And the Department of Commerce has found that we need over 143,000 BIPOC households to become homeowners to close the racial gap between their white peers, with King County needing the largest number of BIPOC homeowners to close that gap. Home equity is the #1 asset of Americans, and it's an opportunity that our BIPOC neighbors do not get. I distinctly remember the day my dad bought his house, and a couple years later, he was able to pull equity out from his said house to buy his parents, my grandparents, a house. And years later, my brother and I were able to purchase our own home. It is directly correlated that children of parents who have a home have an easier time later on obtaining home ownership. United Way's mission states that we are working toward a racially just community, and our strategic plan is specifically focused on BIPOC communities leading that systems change. This is a great example of that, and this is a great example of that. And while we no longer have racial restrictive covenants, the bans on federal mortgages backing Black neighborhoods and the legacy of generations in our policy has a long life. I ask that you support this bill today. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before we hear from our next panel, if we could have on deck in person, George Davenport, Karina Obar, and Donald King on Zoom. But let's call up our next panel in Zoom, Quintard Taylor, Sean Scott, and Sophia Dowling. Quintard. Is Mr. Taylor there perhaps and just on Zoom? Or on mute, pardon me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great, now we can hear you.
I only have, yes, can you hear me?
We can, please proceed, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to take a slightly different approach because I only have a few seconds. Let me quote the Republican Secretary of State of Washington, a man named A. Ludlow Kramer that some people may remember. He said, "The blood of every seep deeply into the American soil and cannot be easily removed. But here in Washington State for slavery."
Mr. Taylor, we're going to start your time over. We're having a hard time hearing you. Maybe if you turn your video off, we might be able to hear you a little better. And just, do you happen to be related to Representative Taylor? Just wondering.
I can do that. I'm in Pearland, Texas, and so I'm far removed from where you are.
There we go.
Let me
just
try to cut to the quick.
Okay, we can hear you better. Go ahead. We're starting your time over.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
We can.
I'm not going to start over because essentially I'm going to say what everybody else is saying. I support Senate Bill 5496, the Covenant Homeownership Bill, and I support it because we have had in this state a long legacy of the racial discrimination. I'm a historian, so I can speak to this. I'm an expert on African-American history in the Pacific Northwest, and I can tell you that the first person to suffer from a restricted covenant was the most prominent Republican in the state of Washington in 1906, a man named Horace Caton Jr. And there have been other examples time and time again. And the ghettos, essentially, of Washington spread through the major cities, as you probably know, and they spread through the smaller cities. And eventually, they cut out thousands, not hundreds, but thousands of African Americans who couldn't access the homes. And so I urge you to pass this legislation to right an injustice that's been around for far too long, and injustice has been recognized by so many people, and you finally have the ability to do something about it. You have the ability to change it once and for all. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And, thanks to your daughter, we hopefully will. I'd also like you to please introduce yourself for the record. And it's okay if you say you're Representative Taylor's father.
Okay. I don't think I need to, but I am Quintard Taylor. I am the Scott and Dorothy Bullock Professor Emeritus at the University of Washington. I was at the University of Washington for some 22 years. I started my career at Washington State University. I've dedicated my life, my professional life, to studying the history of African Americans in the state of Washington and in particularly in Seattle. And so I think I know something about this long history of racial discrimination in housing. And it's impossible to say quickly how insidious that history has been, how detrimental it's been to African Americans right up to this day. I wish I had more time. I'll send my written comments to you so that you can have them.
Thank you so much, Professor Taylor.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Professor Taylor. Let's hear next from Sean Scott.
All right, thank you very much, Madam Vice Chair, Madam Chair as well. I'm Sean Scott with the Statewide Poverty Action Network, and also a one-time student of Professor Taylor's as well. Represented on the Senate Housing Committee are elected officials from 11 of Washington State's 49 legislative districts, and racial restrictive covenants existed in all 11 of these LDs. Chair Kuderer, segregationist deeds banning Black and Brown residents exist in every section of the 48th LD, from Medina to Clyde Hill to Redmond, Kirkland, and Bellevue. Madam Vice Chair, Frame, the 36th LD in Seattle actually had some of Seattle's most racially exclusive neighborhoods with covenants through the 20th century that banned Black and Brown residents, often in the same sentence and paragraphs as livestock and stray animals were banned. And Ranking Member Fortunato, in your 31st LD subdivisions built by the Auburn Development Company, the Western Washington Corporation of Seventh-day Adventists, and other realtors only permitted non-white residents as domestic servants. So as we have these conversations about whether or not structural racism is a faded tragedy that we read about in history books, or if it's something that continues pervading through the lives of Washingtonians, I think we have a real opportunity in front of us to create a housing stability fund by assessing a fee on these covenants. The history lives, and it lives in many unfortunate ways that I think this body has the opportunity to correct.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. And then Sophia Dowling.
Madam Chair, committee members, my name is Sophia Dowling, and I am the project coordinator for the Racial Restrictive Covenants Project authorized under HB 1335. I am reading this statement on behalf of Dr. James Gregory. Although far from complete, we have documented more than 50,000 properties that have racist restrictions across Washington state. We need to understand that racial restrictive covenants and other measures limited not just where people might live, but also access to home ownership of any kind. Because BIPOC people were banned from most neighborhoods, their ability to buy homes in general was limited. And the effect was compounded by federal policies and local planning decisions, which made it difficult for people of color to access loans and mortgages. So for generations, Black, Indigenous, and Asian Americans had lower rates of home ownership. The price escalations of the last 40 years exacerbated this harm, making it impossible for those who were previously shut out of the housing market to gain entry. Today, only about 1/3 of Black families in Washington own homes, and in King and Pierce County, the numbers are even lower. This bill is about the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution that requires each state to ensure equal protection in their laws and policies to all persons regardless of race. Washington state violated that guarantee when, through delegation of power to counties and cities, it authorized racial restrictive covenants. This bill acknowledges the financial losses that resulted from racist policies by government entities in violation of the 14th Amendment, and it will help some of the families who were denied the chance to buy a home and build wealth through home ownership.
Great.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's hear next in Zoom, George Davenport, Karina Obar, and Donald King. And if we could have on deck here in person, Ann Campbell, Denise Rodriguez, and Michonne Preston, that would be great. Let's go to George Davenport.
Madam Chair and the committee, I am Pastor Reverend George Davenport, and I am the present pastor of the People's Institutional Baptist Church, which on Sunday we will celebrate our 81st anniversary of being in the Central District. I've had the pleasure and honor of being able to be the pastor over several seniors. And it is clear if they were here to speak, they would speak about the tragic history of them being denied in several occasions home ownership due to unfair housing restrictions. They've suffered long enough, and they have lacked the ability to have the dignity of being able to just be a citizen of this state. We believe that it is time now to be able to correct the evils of the past, as I have watched and followed several of my members to death. They have not been able to take pride in being able to have wealth, to be able to leave for their children. We're also part of the Nehemia Initiative, and we are poised to be able to use our properties to be able to create affordable housing. We support SB 5496. We believe that this will be a game changer, especially as far as people of color, to be able to enjoy the dignity of home ownership and being a citizen of this state. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Chair.
Let's hear next from Karina Obar.
Good afternoon. My name is Karina Obar, and I am the manager of the home ownership program at the Washington State Housing Finance Commission. We're so excited about this legislation and the chance to be a key instrument in the home ownership covenant program. Since 1983, the commission has provided home loans and down payment assistance to more than 100,000 families across the state. That comes with robust home buyer education for many pre-purchase financial counseling to ensure long-term success. We have the expertise, experience, and partnerships with lenders and real estate professionals across across the state to implement this program immediately, and it is critically needed. With home prices soaring out of sight, much deeper down payment assistance is needed, especially in communities of color. Last fiscal year, we helped 5,638 families to buy a home in Washington, but only 7% of them were Black families. 17% were Latinx, 4% were Asian, about 3% were Indigenous or Native. Of course, we try to target disadvantaged communities through partners such as Homesight and through marketing and advertising efforts. We also have a small pool of down payment resources that can bring home ownership within reach for lower income folks, but that resource pool is too small and the racial gap is too large, and it gets wider every day. But programs based on race are needed, programs that are explicitly undo the lasting impact of discrimination, not just with outreach efforts, but actual funding that unlocks opportunities for these families. And we urge you to support this legislation, start to undo the state's legacy of housing discrimination, and change the future for BIPOC families. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to have to go to another meeting, so I'm going to turn the meeting over to my Vice Chair, Senator Frame, and we will be going until 4. And thanks, everyone, and Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's hear next from Donald King.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Vice Chair and members of the committee. Thanks for having me here this morning, or this afternoon, I'm sorry to say, but I'm a 40-year resident of Seattle Central District. I'm Donald King, 40-year resident of Seattle Central District. And I'm president and CEO of the Nehemia Initiative. Pastor Davenport spoke of this recently, and a member of the Black Home Initiative team. To be able to be brief on my testimony, and I will send the written testimony in its full text later, but I believe Black History Month is an appropriate time to be able to, one, reflect on the history of centuries of injustice to Black folks in America, and also just the triumphs that we've had too, and those bright points in history, like the 14th Amendment that was also mentioned. We would like to take this opportunity to urge you to make history locally, and to make history on being able to redress those decades of injustices in home ownership through forms of legal segregation, redlining, exclusionary zoning, racial restrictive covenants, and injurious Washington State Supreme Court decisions. Washington State and local endorsements of these inequities are a direct violation of the U.S. Constitution, and specifically the 14th Amendment. These policies were illegal, and they contributed to an inability of Black families to build generational wealth through home ownership. The Nehemia Initiative is a faith-based community development initiative with a mission to develop affordable homes on underutilized Black church property.
Thank you,
We're poised to contribute to the production of hundreds of affordable homes with the success and passage of this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. King, for your time today. Next up, Ann Campbell. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Frame, Ranking Member Fortunato, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Ann Campbell. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Managing Director of the Homeownership Unit in the Department of Commerce. I am signed in as other because Senate Bill 5496 is not in the governor's budget. However, it is important that I provide additional context on the importance of taking concrete action to address homeownership disparities. The Homeownership Disparities Work Group issued a report improving homeownership rates for Black, Indigenous, and people of color in Washington State, which is authorizing the creation of special purpose credit programs. This bill is authorizing those. As was cited by this report and prior panelists, homeownership rates for BIPOC families are low, 19% less than non-Hispanic white families. The discrepancy of homeownership rates is also reflected in high-income Black families, who are still 20% less likely to be homeowners than non-Hispanic white families. Why? You have to have a stake in the game. That stake is a combination of good credit, a healthy chunk of savings for a down payment, and 3 to 5% of sales price to cover closing costs. Yes, we have a wide array of homeownership assistance programs to assist, but these programs are unable to address the needs identified in this bill. So we know that homeownership is both a wealth generator, the primary way most households accumulate wealth, and it requires wealth to get in the game. This bill helps the most vulnerable to displacement and gentrification and is an excellent concept. We have shared ideas with the sponsor about a different approach on the governance of this bill, and we appreciate the partnership and look forward to further collaboration.
Thank you, Ms. Gamble. All right, Denise Rodriguez.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Frame and Ranking Member Fortunato, as well as the other members of the committee. For the record, my name is Denise Rodriguez, and I'm Executive Director of the Washington Home Ownership Resource Center, also known as WHRC. Our mission is to increase and preserve home ownership in Washington State. Our home ownership hotline, which launched over 25 years ago, provides home buyers with information, education, and referral to pre-purchase counseling, down payment assistance, first-time homebuyer classes, and many other valuable tools to make the dream of home ownership a reality. WHRC has been participating in the Black Home Initiative Network, and I was also a member of the Racial Disparities Work Group convened by the Department of Commerce. Last year, the legislature requested via proviso that the Department of Commerce convene a work group to examine the causes of homeownership disparity for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color and make recommendations to you about what actions you can take to increase homeownership parity. The program proposed by this bill speaks directly to the recommendations of that work group to increase the amount of funding available for direct assistance to homebuyers, prioritize assistance to people who have current or historical ties to previously redlined neighborhoods, and to pilot a special purpose credit program for people historically denied access to opportunity in the financial system. As a member of that work group, I am grateful for the leadership that the Senate showed last year in calling for this report and its recommendations. I'm here today to urge you to continue that leadership and pass this bill. I'm looking forward to working with you and the many allies who've spoken here today to increase access to home ownership for those historically locked out. Thank you.
Thank you. Michonne Preston on Zoom.
Hi, I'm on Zoom. Good afternoon, Vice Chair Frame and committee members. For the record, my name is Dr. Michonne Preston, and I'm the CEO of Habitat for Humanity of Washington State, and I represent 27 Habitat affiliates statewide. And I was a member of the legislative work group that produced the homeownership disparity study. I'm signed in pro on this bill, and I thank prime sponsor Senator Lovick and the many, many people who've been working with him. The study took a deep dive into BIPOC homeownership rates statewide, and for practitioners like Habitat, it's allowed us to build in better metrics county by county. We were really surprised when we heard through the Building Industry Association of Washington in their report in 2022 that stated that to qualify for a homeownership mortgage, a household had to have an income now of $172,000 a year. That's about 15% of Washingtonians, and that's a fraction of BIPOC families. And Habitat for Humanity and other homeownership developers can make home ownership possible for BIPOC families, but not without the financial resources to make the projects pencil. This bill is the beginning of fixing the holes in the fabric of our society, and without it, the gap widens. Through affordable homeownership models like Habitat, BIPOC families have been closing the door on poverty permanently. So I urge you to support Senate Bill 5496, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify.
Thank you for your time today. Let's get prepared on Zoom. Norma Martinez Oliveira, Council Member Kiara Daniels, and then Nathan Gorton, if you want to come up front. You'll be third on this next panel. Norma.
Hi, my name is Norma Martinez, and thanks God, I give thanks to God first. Then I have my own house because of down payment assistance through Homesight. We've been struggling since I have my little girls. Here, when we emigrate to this United States, we've been having a difficult time, not only feeding my girls, but not having a space where my girls to live. And then it's very hard for us to rent because the rent is very expensive. Plus, we working so hard, my husband and I will never be able to buy a house until we get this down payment assistance. We always deny from the banks. And not only because of our skin color, but our language barriers. always we push out from work, from jobs. And now, thank God that we have our own house, we're working in a good place, that they're there, care for people of color, care for people of different cultures. And I'm working with low-income families because I have to give it back what I get. And I give thanks to God and to those people who really help us, because my daughter have emotional issue, moving school to school, moving places to place, when they never know there gonna be success, or they never know there gonna be security, because people, when you're renting, they can kick you out anytime they want. And then it's been so hard for us, but now we have our own house and it's great. And my kids can feel like they have their own house to live.
Thank you so much, Ms. Martinez Oliveros. Thank you for your time today. Councilmember Daniels.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Vice Chair Frame, Ranking Member Fortunato, and committee members. I am Tacoma City Council Member Kiara Daniels. I am a board member of the Pierce County Habitat for Humanity, and most importantly, I am a direct descendant of these racist policies that we are trying to fix today. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify in support of Senate Bill 5496. I would like to first say that the city of Tacoma is supportive of any policies that close the racial wealth gap, particularly in homeownership, and address the longstanding impacts of the history of housing discrimination. The city has also been a partner in the Black Home Initiative, along with many others mentioned here today. We know that homeownership is the primary way most households build wealth in the U.S., and yet access to the opportunity to own has not been evenly distributed. Barriers exist in our laws, policies, and practices for Black and Brown people to achieve homeownership. I am a public servant, I have a master's degree, and it took me over 8 years to be able to access homeownership that I was only able to access because of a housing program that is supported by initiatives like this. And the unfortunate reality is that if we don't act now aggressively at the local, state, and federal level, there won't be many more folks that look like me who will be able to achieve homeownership. This bill takes important steps to help close the racial gap in homeownership, and addresses the longstanding impacts of the history of housing discrimination through the creation of Covenant Homeownership, of the Covenant Homeownership account. I ask that you support. Thank you.
Thank you, council member. At this point in the hearing, I'm going to have to get much more assertive about that 90-second timer so we can get everybody in. So if anybody gets cut off by me in the next few minutes, I encourage you to send your written testimony so we can hear the whole story. With that, before we have Nathan speak, if we could have on deck here in person to come into the front row to be ready to go, Anna Boone, Ali Shabani, and then on Zoom, Daryl Smith. Nathan, go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Vice Chair Frame and committee. Thank you for the opportunity to come and testify in support of this bill. The Fed recently released a number that said that homeowners' net wealth in this country is 40 times that of the net wealth of renters. And I think to get directly to Senator Fortunato's very good question earlier when the bill was being briefed, we have seen, because of the housing crisis that we have, that a lot of times people have to borrow money, right? They borrow money from their parents or from their uncle or from their aunt. Sometimes they borrow it, sometimes it's a gift. We know, while I haven't seen any hard data on it, I know in talking to my members that that option just isn't there for a lot of BIPOC families, and that's because a lot of times that money comes from families who are third generation homeowners, right, and have been able to benefit from being homeowners. And so and we know that opportunity was taken away from people through policies passed at city councils, and honestly those policies were passed sometimes at the encouragement of the industry that I represent. So we're here today in full support of this bill. You won't always hear us here supporting a document recording fee increase. That's something that we don't always do, but we're here today supporting the bill and supporting the fee increase. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nathan. And I'll just take a moment of privilege to say thank you to your organization for recognizing the past harm done by your organization, acknowledging that in present time. So thank you for that. All right, let's hear from Ali Shabani, and then Anna Boone, and then Daryl Smith. We'll go to you next. So Ali.
Thank you, Vice Chair Frame and Ranking Member Fortunato, for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Ali Shabani, and I'm here in support of SB 5496 and to share my experience in working with purchase assistance products for first-time home buyers. I've been in the lending industry since 2006 and worked exclusively with first-time home buyers from 2015 to 2021 in my capacity at Homesight, and now I do the same at Habitat for Humanity of Seattle, King, and Kittitas counties. I am also part of the lending and underwriting subgroup of the Black Home Initiative through Civic Commons that was mentioned earlier. Purchase assistance works in providing opportunities for buyers that would not be able to otherwise participate by helping to cover their down payment and most of their closing costs and reducing their minimum cash contributions. These products also improve approval odds for the first mortgage. Down payment assistance is considered an asset that reduces risks and can offset other shortcomings during underwriting. The larger the down payment, the lower risk for the first mortgage lender. All of these products have had a positive impact on increasing homeownership opportunities in general, but they have not been sufficient in making a large difference in Black homeownership rates in the state. Black homeownership rates are less than half of white rates, and other racial groups also lag behind white Washingtonians as well. More specific products are needed to help bridge the gap between current home prices and affordability. More robust down payment products will allow first-time homebuyers that have been historically underserved to find decent housing and start building wealth. Thank you.
Thank you. Anna.
All right, Vice Chair Frame, members of the committee, I'm Anna Boone and I oversee government relations and public affairs for Zillow here in our home state of Washington. I am also here as a network partner of the Black Home Initiative. I'd like to express our support for SB 5496. Our mission at Zillow is to make it easier for consumers to unlock life's next chapter, and we're firmly committed to reducing barriers to housing. I'd like to share a few quick data points as they relate to the proposal in front of you. As we've heard, one of the most significant obstacles preventing potential home buyers from accessing home ownership is saving for a down payment, and 40% of all buyers report relying on a gift or loan from family or friends for at least part of it. 2/3 of renters cited affording a down payment is the biggest hurdle to buying a home. The Covenant Homeownership Account's targeted down payment assistance and support with closing costs will put homeownership within reach for historically disadvantaged individuals and communities throughout our state, giving them access to the intergenerational wealth creation and economic security that homeownership enables. I urge your support. Thank you.
You get a prize for finishing before 90 seconds. Well done. Daryl Smith.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Frame and members of the committee. Thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Daryl Smith. I am the Executive Director of Homesight, Community Development Financial Institution. We've been around for about 30 years as a mission-driven lender. We help families build generational wealth through affordable home ownership, through our lending products and other activities. In last year, 2022, we served 80 families with first mortgages and 186 second mortgages. Every one of those 186 second mortgages represents down payment assistance. So we had a really good, strong year, and this is because of partnerships with great organizations, some of which you've heard from today. We count our blessings as being part of the Black Home Initiative as well, where this work is really focused and concentrated for all of us. But despite those numbers last year, there's still a staggeringly huge gulf in terms of BIPOC and particularly African-American home ownership. Last year, 68% of our clients were BIPOC, 45% were Black. So if we think about those numbers and yet the gulf that exists, I think about, from my own personal life, how many college educations were never started or paid for? How many successful businesses that relied on the equity coming from a home were not started and contributing here to the community? Homeownership is the primary driver of wealth in the United States, and for many, many decades, folks that look like me were shut out of that process, or the value wasn't there if they were lucky enough to get there to begin with. I urge passage of this bill, and I look forward to working with all of you to see it happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time today. Next up in Zoom, we'll have Charles Kalanji, John Smith, and Tanya Wortham. And as a heads up for who will be on deck, Michelle Thomas, Sylvia Real, and Lisa Walters. But let's go back up to the top to Charles Kalanji. Charles, you appear to be on mute.
Sorry about that.
We can hear you now. Please proceed.
Okay. Hi, my name is Charles Kalonji. I'm a loan officer with New American Funding in Federal Way, Washington. I've been a loan officer for 18 years, and helping first-time home buyers are a huge part of my business. And I support the the bill 5496 because I think it's very needed to correct the past wrongs that were done to African Americans and people of color by restricting home ownership for them. If we look at the whole 134 years that Washington has been a state, and we realize that in 1968, that was only 55 years ago. In comparison to the 134 years. So it's not fair to say, well, everybody's just on even playing field now if we just have race-neutral programs. Race-neutral programs are not enough. Damage repair is required for what has happened. For a particular example, it's like if you have two people running a mile to race to the finish line, and then one person, you say, okay, you got a 5-minute head start. It's just not fair. So we need this to help rectify the wrongs that were done with racially restrictive housing covenants and to provide home ownership opportunities for all Americans.
Thank you so much for your time today. John Smith.
Good afternoon. I'm John Smith with Washington State Employees Credit Union, also the current president of WMBA, and I stand in support of Senate Bill 5496. Many have studied the history and documented facts showing the negative impacts which systemic and racially restrictive policies have made on certain populations, especially here in Washington State. So I won't go too deeply into that, but I look at, as a lender, now what do we do? So why is this special purpose credit program of this type so important? And as has been stated already, quite frankly, because traditional race-neutral programs in Washington State have not been effective. For example, in 2020, only 3% of loans packaged and sold to Fannie Mae were made to Black families. The U.S. population is just over 12% and similar here in Washington. So today, Black homeownership rates are 31% compared to 68% for whites. And we ask ourselves, well, why is that? Well, the data is there to support it. So what I say is after the conversations and hearings are all completed, negotiations are final, it becomes then a lender's responsibility to operationalize and deliver these intended programs. And I just want to say these programs will make a huge support and difference in the lives of many Black Americans in Washington State. I urge passage.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Tanya Wortham.
Hi, my name is Tanya Wortham. I am a director on the WMBA, and I also am a member of the BHI committee and the New American Dream program through my company, New American Funding. I am testifying today in support of the bill 5496. I've been involved in learning about the disparities in the BIPOC community home ownership over the last 2 years. I've been in the mortgage and real estate industry for over 25 years. And unfortunately, I was woefully ignorant to the issues that were being faced by these communities until I was involved in the WMBA and my company. There isn't time to educate everyone. I've had programs, I've had initiatives, I've worked to educate the people in my industry, and this bill is going to make some progress towards helping to bridge that gap of home ownership. And on a personal note, I have 2 mixed children who live in Washington State. When their father bought a home, he faced many challenges that I thought were just anomalies because I didn't understand what was really going on. It turns out that they weren't. And so for my children's generation and generations to follow, I hope that we can rectify this and pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, let's go to Michelle Thomas in person, and then Saul and Lisa, you'll round us out. Michelle Thomas, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Michelle Thomas with the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance, pro on Senate Bill 5496. Sorry, I'm just going to let this hang here. The bill is critical in moving Black, Indigenous, and people of color out of the perilous, expensive, and unstable realities of renting into the stability that a 30-year mortgage uniquely offers, particularly now with average rent at $1,866 $1,866, renter families are struggling to make ends meet. Black households in Washington are renters at twice the rate of white households. And rates of homelessness are higher for Black households even when factors such as income are controlled. The major reason is that white people's support networks are more likely to have generational wealth and stability and to own a home, where extended family can find safety in times of need. Renters in Washington are not allowed to have family members stay with them for more than a limited number of days, regardless of how much in need of shelter their family member is. Home ownership gets people out of renting. Renting in Washington shouldn't be so perilous, but the stability of a 30-year mortgage cannot be rivaled. The bill creates an opportunity and an appropriately targeted program to specifically begin to undo the harms created by the past and to shield people from the harms of renting today. Please pass.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. All right, Saul, let's hear from you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Saul Villarreal. I'm a residential real estate agent working primarily with first-time home buyers, and I live and work in Seattle. I'm here to speak in favor of SB 5496. As you've heard many times today, over the course of modern American history, homeownership has been not only the best way to provide long-term stable housing, but also one of the only ways in which the average American family builds generational wealth. Our state's racial wealth gap and our racial homeownership gap can both trace their roots back to federal housing policies. That's why including the descendants of those affected is so important. To your point, Senator Fortunato, they've lost out on multiple generations of wealth at this point. The racial wealth gap and the racial homeownership gap are both very closely related, and helping address one will also help address the other. SB 5496 is a great bill because it seeks to help people who have been negatively impacted by institutional racism at the state and federal level, and it funds that help through a negligible fee charged to home buyers who are fortunate enough to be able to buy homes. I encourage you to support it. And for what it's worth, my first-time home buyers are always excited to hear that a portion of their closing costs, so small they don't even notice it's there, is going to support their housing trust fund. I've supported a couple of document recording fee bills in the past. I may be doing another one later this week. And every time I talk to my buyers about it, they're always excited about it and they support the bills. So I'm sure they'll support this one too.
Thank you so much. And for our last testifier for today, Lisa Walters.
Thank you, Vice Chair Frame and members of the committee. My name is Lisa Walters. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Seattle Housing Authority. And today I'm speaking on behalf of the Seattle Housing Authority and the Association of Washington Housing Authorities. We recognize that there is a legacy in our country and our state of racial inequity, and it is past time to address it. Systemic and structural changes at all levels of government are needed to answer and address past discrimination. In Washington, the homeownership rate of BIPOC households is 49%. The homeownership rate for Black households in Washington is only 31%. This is a result of policies and practices that include redlining, racially restricted covenants, and mortgage subsidies. The Association of Washington Housing Authorities and Seattle Housing Authority recognize the great racial disparities in homeownership in our state and are advocating for the passage of this bill to begin to address this gap. These disparities cannot stand, and access to homeownership opportunities must be expanded to those historically impacted by archaic housing covenants. This bill would be a step toward closing the racial gap in homeownership, and we urge you to vote yes to begin to address the longstanding impacts of systemic racism in housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you to everyone who testified today.